So ultrasound guided dry needling for mechanical back pain. So low back pain can be divided into two components, the axial and the radicular. Most common between 20 to 40 years, men and women are equally affected. This is one of the few conditions where women are not the predominant sex. Acute pain lasting less than 6 weeks resolves by themselves after rest, physiotherapy, medications, etc. Subchronic is another terminology used where it is for 6 to 12 weeks, and chronic is when pain lasts more than 12 weeks. Actual cases of back pain, infection, disc prolapse, etc., are found in less than 20% of patients. So, mechanical back pain forms 80% of all back pains. In more than 80%, the source of back pain is unclear, with MRI, CT, X-ray being normal. It is called the non-specific LBP or mechanical LBP. So, genesis of this back pain, I imagine after yesterday's talk, many of you can guess as to what is the problem here. Mostly it is lifestyle issues like lack of exercise, sitting in chairs all the time, losing in India, losing the traditional habits like sitting down on the ground, sitting down, eating on the ground, use of Indian toilet. If you look at the posture for an Indian toilet, the squatting posture is something which really challenges the leg muscles, the back muscles, and everything. It's the ideal position actually for the voiding that is necessary. But in addition, it is a regular exercise every day for the person. But then, how many people have access to an Indian toilet today, especially the socially upward doctors? Then, one is this lack of daily exercise which was afforded by traditional way of life. Second is sitting in chairs, sedentary work style. Then mental stress. We don't work with our body, but most of the work is done by our minds. And another very important feature is vitamin deficiencies, because vitamin deficiencies play a huge role, because muscles are the ones which undergo constant wear and tear in daily movements. And these two vitamins, vitamin B12 and vitamin D3, I do not know if other vitamins are involved because nobody has done any research on it to find out. But someone has been kind enough to research on them and tell us. Vitamin D3 is the most efficient anti-inflammatory agent in the body. And when you have micro tears in muscles during movements, excessive movements, etc., the healing happens automatically and we never get to know that there was a tear. It doesn't even hit the conscious levels. But if you're deficient in vitamin D3, these healings do not occur, and these MTRPs which might have formed by the tearing of the muscle fibers, they remain, they fester and form areas of inflammation in muscles. So people with low vitamin D will come with pains. And vitamin B12 is the one which is necessary for the myelination of the nerves. If the myelination of the nerve is deficient, then obviously you can have a irritable motor nerve firing at the neuromuscular junction and forming myofascial trigger points. So this is the way vitamin deficiencies affect pain and produce pain and interfere with the relief of pain. So routinely at Ashirvad, we never do any patient without assessing the vitamin deficiencies and correcting it. And in this correction, actually, if vitamin D3 is less than 30, straight away we give an injection. Because I have seen that when you give sachets and 2000 unit supplementation, it just doesn't go up. The example is me. I was very deficient once. I had 5, my vitamin D3 was 5. I tested it only because I had a severe frozen shoulder. Normally, I am a yoga person and I am used to doing something like this. And suddenly I found I couldn't even do this much. And then I found, I know very well all the pains associated with vitamin D3. With frozen shoulder, and I found that my vitamin D3 was just 5. So then I corrected it by taking sachets and whatever. For 2 or 3 years, I found that I always went up to maximum 22, 25. So from 5, of course, 25 was a good number, but I could never go up. It was only after I took the injection that I have gone into the 55-60 range. The range of vitamin D3 is also very ridiculous. They say 30 to 100. 30 to 100 is no range. You should say 30 to 40 or 90 to 100. You cannot say 30 to 100. It is like between the earth and the sky. It is like that. So I take the median value of 75 as the normal value. So I usually try to put my patients there. And vitamin B12 also is another thing like this, where 200 to 800 is the range. So I take only 500 as normal, and anything below this I correct. See, I'm talking about mechanical back pain, but I'm going off into vitamin deficiencies because they are the most important features of these pains which come up now and then inexplicably in so many patients. Now, sedentary lifestyle without exercises causes degenerative changes in both discs and the paravertebral muscles. See, degenerative changes were associated with post-40 people. But today, courtesy software, working from home, sedentary lifestyle has pushed this age, lower age, to 20s, 25s, and particularly sitting in chairs. I have a lot of things against chairs. Even in chairs, I sit like this most of the time. Standing for prolonged periods, poor posture, etc. The intervertebral disc is most relaxed in lying down position. So this is the reason why I made Madhavi to reiterate those pressures to you guys. And at the end of the night, the intervertebral disc plumps up. This is the reason why most patients complain of worst pain in the morning, especially when they bend down to brush their teeth, which improves as they start moving around. I'm talking about patients where if you do an MRI, there is nothing much wrong with their disc. But when they wake up in the morning, their back is very stiff, and it is only after they move around for about an hour or two, the morning stiffness goes. So morning stiffness is not just in rheumatoid arthritis, but it is a feature of many of these back pain people as well. Intervertebral disc, I will go into some aspects of intervertebral discs which require elaboration. Some of it will be repetition, but I think it will be good repetition. It acts as a shock absorber, dispersing the weight and impact sustained by the back. It also serves as a channel for nutrition flow between the spinal cord and the spine. So outer layer of annulus fibrosus is attached to the end plate. Please remember, it is not just the two ends of the disc, one which opens into the vertebral canal and one which opens out into the abdomen between the posterior longitudinal and anterior longitudinal ligaments. There is a very large part of disc which abuts the end plates, the superior end plate as well as the inferior end plate. Superior end plate of the vertebra below and the, what is the thing for command L, no? Yeah. Okay. Oh no, I have, yeah. If you see here, the superior end plate of the lower vertebra, sorry, that's the next vertebra. I have next slide, I'll show you later. So anyway, my vertebral epiphysis by means of what is called as Sharpie fibers, while the central annulus fibrosus collagen fibers coalesce with the nucleus to insert themselves obliquely into the cartilaginous end plate. So adult intervertebral disc is an avascular and aneural structure. Flow of nutrients is by passive diffusion from the adjacent end plate vessels, and pre-disc vessels reaching from the inner layer of the disc in centrifugal manner to the outer layer of disc diffusing outwards. So here I was saying, this is the area which is abutting the inferior end plate of the upper vertebra and the superior end plate of the lower vertebra. The disc flattens in erect posture. See, this is the normal disc. If you take a patient and take his MRI in the morning, this is how a disc will look. Whereas if you make him stand and take an MRI, you can see that the nucleus pulposus is flattened out. Its nutrition comes from the surrounding tissues as the back moves. Tissue fluid which enters it when we do exercises, particularly the ones which bend the back forwards and backwards. If there is a lumbar flexion, you are bending forwards. So the front compresses more and the back opens up. So the fluid enters here. And when you do the reverse movement like this, the back closes down and the front opens. So this is a very clever way of getting fluid into the intervertebral disc. So this is the reason why when you do the yoga type of exercises which continuously go like this, that is why it is so very beneficial to the back. As I told you, back is considered as Merudanda in yoga, and that is why they are obsessive compulsive about maintaining its health. So the type of exercises, these are the types of exercises, repetitive flexion extension exercises. This is the classical Surya Namaskar. The nuances of this exercise are tremendous, but here I am only looking at the back aspect of it. The Muslims, when they do their namaz, they do what is called a sajda, which is like this. So they also do something very much like this. So many of my Muslim patients, I tell them that you cannot do your namaz when your back is bad, but after it becomes better, your namaz will improve your back health. So we have to make them able to do this. Now contrast this with the advice by most spine surgeons. Don't sit down, don't sit down on the ground, don't bend your back, do not bend to pick up things from the ground. Can you see what kind of a damage that happens to the nutrition of the disc when you prevent these movements from happening? They are essential movements actually. So anyway, repetitive flexion and extension movements of spine draw the fluid into the disc and expel it in the reverse movements, optimizing the transfer of nutrients from the interstitial fluid into the disc. Yoga type of exercise. Now, many patients tell me I do exercises regularly. When they do the gym type of exercises, where they sit in a chair and do all this, their biceps has to look great. So when they do this, they are loading their spine, and it is a compressive kind of an exercise. It raises the intradiscal pressure and puts a strain on the discs. Walking is an excellent exercise since the muscles of the left and right halves of the body come into action alternately with each step. So it's very good to encourage our patients after we do anything on them to start walking. Even if it is 2 minutes, let them walk. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, that's how they keep increasing. Running is a high impact exercise that can gradually cause degenerative changes. Running, jumping, etc. are not really great for back health. It may give everybody a great endorphin high, but it is not really beneficial to the back health. Walking is in contrast is different. Now Madhavi has mentioned all these, so I will not go into these. Only thing is, when they extrude, when the disc can extrude not just into the canal or into the abdominal cavity, they can extrude through the vertebral end plates into the vertebral bodies. These are called Schmorl's nodes and limbus vertebrae. I will tell you what these things are in the next slide. When small numerous extrusions occur through the end plates, it is called the Scheuermann's disease. Scheuermann's disease, I have treated some women for this. One of them, the pain was so severe that she attempted suicide. And all she had was Scheuermann's disease, where the surgeons have no clue what to do with it because the disc is inside. It is not coming anywhere near the vertebral canal. And this lady responded beautifully to dry needling, and I have not seen her since. She has done very well. Now, if you look at this, this is the normal disc, nice and plump and round. When back muscles are shortened, they compress the disc like this and impinge on the nerve root. This is the nerve root. Just now Priya has explained to you the dorsal root, the median branch which comes to the multifidus and the joint, the intermediate and the lateral roots which go for the erector spinae muscles. They impinge on the nerve root. The irritated root shortens the muscle in both the rami, causing further irritation. These are subtle changes which are going on. The weight is more here because the muscles are shortened. The shortened muscles contract on this intertransversus and the multifidus, and that compresses the nerve root, which in turn will compress the muscle, shorten the muscles further. Can you look at the vicious circles that muscle spasm can initiate and sustain? So I think I don't need to go into this. If you look at this, the same thing is shown here. The nerve root, the dorsal root ganglion, and these are the intermediate and the lateral roots. The anterior nerve root is going to the front of the abdomen and chest and other areas. Now, muscles, discs and facet. As I think I showed this slide yesterday, the amount of muscle bulk is huge. The erector spinae, the psoas, and the quadratus lumborum. Transversus abdominis, which comes through the oblique muscles of the abdomen, and the rectus abdominis in front. The same thing is seen on MRI also, here again. And this is the nice plump normal disc. So back muscle disc can bring the muscle vertebrae together to pressurize the disc and eventually cause prolapse, maybe after a year or two or whatever. The first thing will be the straightening of the lumbar curve, and then they are heading for a prolapse. And these straightened spine fellows, if they suddenly go for a weekend yoga class and try to do Surya Namaskar, I can guarantee you they will go for a prolapse. Whereas if you treat them gently, take them through exercises, cat camel pose, etc., and then make them do Surya Namaskar 6 months later, that will maintain back health. But if they suddenly do weekend warrior kind of exercises, then definitely they'll go for prolapse. See, exercise, when you say yoga is good, it is not all good. It is you should know how to use it. And they can also, when there is a compression like this, there is arthralgia of facets. All these things, this mild disc compression, the mild facet arthralgia cannot be picked up on MRI, cannot be picked up on facet. For the CT to pick up facet arthritis, the grades which Priya described, the grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 with the sclerosis, you don't see in early cases. Let us say a 35-year-old, 40-year-old, you won't see the facet changes. You will not see the disc changes also, except that the discs will look not nice and juicy, but a little black. Other than that, you don't see anything in them. But these changes are enough to produce the mechanical back pain. In addition, these are the small muscles which are also getting affected by the pressure on the nerve root. This is the slide which I showed you yesterday, the connection which shows back muscle spasm, which makes this spine straight like this on MRI as well as on X-ray, and they compress the spine together. And in addition, when you are having this kind of a situation, the psoas is also in spasm. So again, the same thing seen in many. And you can see here the changes which are coming in the discs. This disc looks good. This looks slightly flattened. This looks slightly more black. Can you see the amount of changes in just one spine? And this spine is a normal MRI of a spine. The MRI person will have nothing much to comment, because MRI people are trained to comment for surgeons, not for pain specialists. So they will say it is a significant defect, significant problem if it is something that a surgeon can go in and do something about. But whether it can produce pain or not, the correlation has not been established at all. This is another patient. You can see there is a slight listhesis here. There is narrow pseudo bulges there, and there is narrowing of the space. So if you look at an MRI, eyeballing an MRI can give you a lot of information about mechanical back pain or lack thereof. This is, I think I have explained this again. Normal disc, compressed disc, the facetal issues, everything. And also what happens is there can be forward and backward slips. If the psoas is stronger than erector spinae, there will be a forward slip. If the erector spinae is stronger, it will be a backward pull. Please understand the back muscles act as units, segmental units. So that is the reason why you will get one disc which is anterolisthetic, which slides forward, then it's called, it is called as anterolisthesis, and retrolisthesis if it is going back. And this listhesis can produce tremendous stress on the facets. That is the reason why you have so much of pain in listhetic patients. Listhetic patients take very long to respond to dry needling, but once they respond, they do very well after that. Now, when I think these are the pictures that Madhavi showed, but I'm showing it to you again because these are very important in mechanical back pain. When they extrude through the one nice discrete extrusion into through the end plate is called a Schmall's node. When it is at the edge like this is called limbus vertebrae, where the whole edge of the end plate is completely destroyed. And then when it comes in multiple things like this, it is called Scheuermann's disease. Don't bother about this because this is a study which is available on the internet. I took all these pictures from there only. So this is, you can see various Schmall's nodes. You can see all kinds of changes in these in this person. This is the limbus vertebrae here. This is Scheuermann's. This here is Schmall's. So all these things, MRI will tell you many things if you look at it. Other than the disc and facet pathology, you can see other pathologies too, which can explain your patient's findings. So modic changes are very important. Modic changes in the vertebral body adjacent to the end plates. It's a collateral issue of disc degeneration to become a source of painful back muscle spasm. So this I think is a repeat slide. Facets are synovial joints. Nature has provided a very rich nerve supply to synovial joints so that synovium senses even minute joint movements and makes adjustments. That's what I meant by proprioceptive and kinesthetic information to coordinate movements. See, you don't say how you should bend. Consciously, you have no clue. Before your brain knows that you have bent, you've gone and picked up a safety pin from the ground. It is something which happens automatically and involuntarily, really. So how does the information to do it properly come? It comes because of these synovial information. Not only that, these movements are always very smooth, and you maintain balance during movements to avoid injuries. You take a patient who's got little vertigo or little giddiness and ask him to bend, he will just collapse onto the ground. So when you see that, you should say, thank you, God, I have a normal coordination. The synovial membrane has instant communication with the muscles to coordinate all these joint movements. Every movement requires two opposing groups of muscles to balance the movement to make it streamlined and smooth. So facet arthropathy is a collateral issue of back muscle spasm. The back muscle spasm will go compress the disc first and then cause facet arthropathy or arthralgia or embarrassment. facets have a rich innervation. Joint inner irritation and arthropathy or arthritis activates what is called as Hilton's law. Synovium has a reciprocal nerve supply with the muscles. So synovium irritation, muscle spasm. This is the rule of Hilton's law. And usually the muscles which are involved are the multifidus and the erector spinae. When synovium is irritated, it causes intense back muscle spasm, which is responsible for the so-called facetogenic pain. It is most common in the highest weight bearing joints, which is L4-5 and S1. You may see something like this, all pink facet joints in a mechanical back pain with intense muscle spasm, but no changes on the MRI. This is the nerve supply of the facet from the median branch. So here I couldn't elaborate on this yesterday, so I will. So when MTRPs are there in the back, developed because of sedentary lifestyle, vitamin deficiency, mental stress, etc. See, I also showed a slide yesterday about the mind and the muscle. There is an expressway between the mind and the muscle. This is because of the fright-flight reflex. There is instantaneous connection between your fear. The moment you see a snake on the ground, you get a kick in the solar plexus, and next minute you are ready to run. Can you imagine the amount of muscle preparation which is needed? Which just happens like that. That is because of the tremendous amount of nerve supply, especially sympathetic nerve supply, into the muscles. So MTRPs will develop in the back muscles, and the taut bands in the back muscles, they cause the stiffness. And you keep bending with these stiff muscles. They impede the muscle, all the movements, but you still manage to move. And when these are the muscles. I'm just showing this to reiterate the number of muscles which are there. And the two groups, the outer one, the middle group, etc. And this movement's essential for activities of daily life, sitting down, getting up, turning in bed, bending a little to pick up something on the ground, etc. All these are impeded by stiff muscles, but we keep continuing to do these movements that will worsen the synovitis. And this leads to repetitive spasms, and this leads to myofascial trigger points. So the crucial factor to be understood here is that there is a definite link between the facetal pain and the muscles. This vicious cycle has far-reaching consequences to all the back problems. So the MTRPs in these muscles, in the major muscles here and in the quadratus lumborum, will produce secondary triggers in the buttock muscles, in the leg muscles, and in this vastus intermedius and the adductor magnus seem to take a very huge load. But there will be some patients who will come and tell you, all my pain is at the ischial tuberosity. So every patient will come and tell you something very different depending on how their body is oriented, how their posture is, how muscles get stressed. So the stressed muscles only will develop myofascial triggers and pains. So there is an intense interaction between the muscles. So here you have the different layers of muscles, different myofascial triggers. Long-standing muscle spasms give rise to a mind-boggling array of problems, manifestations, and very bizarre sounding unanticipated symptoms. Because they are bizarre, because you don't know that muscles are involved. Most people are trained to ignore muscles. So the symptoms of the patient look bizarre and unanticipated by the untrained mind of the physician. These symptoms are not unanticipated. If you know muscle, they are anticipated. As I told you yesterday, most of my diagnosis is made when I sit and listen to the patient. I just confirm it by physical examination. They give you their history. They give you their diagnosis in their history. So these manifestations and bizarre unanticipated symptoms is because of the uncompromising and uneducated mind of the doctor. Intense muscle spasm around the nerve root foramen can cause nerve root entrapment, which I'll elaborate today. And then spasms, MTRPs in the intertransversus and multifidi, rotatoris, etc., can cause back issues erector spinae, quadratus lumborum, all these things. Then when it comes, especially L4-5, it goes and causes spasm of the piriformis and the gemelli. Then comes a sciatica pain. See, sciatica can be a feature of problems at the L4-5 radicals, or it can be a problem, secondary problem, or a double whammy at the piriformis and gemelli. So what happens in sciatica or in radiculopathy is the muscle spasm in the myotomal distribution of the nerve, of the sciatic nerve. If you look at the muscle supply of the sciatic nerve, it will straight away explain to you the distribution of the radicular pain. So this is a cross-sectional view which is very nice. Here is your disc, here is your facet, this is your spinal cord. This is the three aspects of erector spinae, spinalis, longissimus, iliocostalis. And this is the quadratus lumborum. This is the intertransversus muscle between the two transverse processes. This is your psoas. Here is your nerve root. Can you appreciate how much this can get affected either by psoas spasm or by the intertransversus spasm? So this is a patient, our nurse Lata, who had a severe back pain, and she kept telling me back pain aahe, back pain aahe. So I said just do needling, and ghar ka murgi dal hi hoti hai. So she didn't do needling. So she went and did MRI and triumphantly came and showed me the MRI. So now Lata also is playing the sophistication card with me. So she showed me the MRI. I said, okay, great, this MRI looks nice. I can't find anything much wrong with you. And look at this disc, L4, L5, or rather L4 and L5. So there is nothing really very significant in this. So I said, do needling. This time she couldn't say anything. I told Varsha, just do some needling for her. She did the needling. Obviously, Varsha was not as invasive as to go into the intertransversus muscle. She did everything. So she got relief, good relief. But again, she would come back with pain. So I said, okay, fine, I will do needling. And I did intertransversus. As I was doing needling, I saw that because of Varsha's needling, that the quadratus lumborum or the erector spinae or the buttock muscles, they were all okay. They were not in very great pain. But the moment I put a needle into the intertransversus muscle, she was like, and this is my pain. So I said, okay, now we will do a trigger injection for you, but let us see how long this relief lasts. It produced a good relief for about a week or 10 days. Then we did trigger injection. If you see, this is a trigger injection into the intertransversus muscle. This is not an epidural spread. This is a small amount of dye, and this is not in the epidural space. This is in the psoas. You can see the typical psoas distribution. This is in the intertransversus muscle, mainly here. And this is the lateral view. I apologize for the bad picture which is taken here. This is your vertebra. You can see that there is no dye here. All the dye is in the psoas. And then there is a dye here in the intertransversus. This was a selective injection of the intertransversus muscle. This has been a pet project of mine. I believe that transforaminal epidurals work because you are doing actually a trigger injection of the intertransversus muscle. So since Lata is in-house and I can always go and do a transforaminal in her anytime, so I said, let me do this experiment. And anyway, with the COVID, it's good to give you only 10 milligrams of steroid rather than 60 milligrams of steroid. So I did this, and she continues to be normal. So let us hear her testimonial. Can we have the audio on? I think this video is not playing. Okay, you can interview Lata anyway. She's here.
एक महीने से बहुत बैक पेन हो रहा था, मैं काम बिल्कुल नहीं कर सकती थी.
What's happening?
एक महीने से.
It's not playing. So now I'll show a few needling ultrasounds, and that will be the end of the talk, I think. This is the iliocostalis, longissimus, and spinalis. This patient is not a back pain patient. She is actually a cancer patient of CA pancreas, but she was so thin and fair that I could show all the muscles very well. So these muscles, these are not her muscles. This is another patient of chronic pancreatitis. This is a pediatric patient where I have put the needles. This is the facet spine, the needle going into the spinalis. This is in the longissimus. Here is your peritoneum quadratus lumborum. This is a needle which is going only in the erector spinae. So if you look at the radicular distribution of pain, this is the cutaneous distribution. Actually, what is called as the cutaneous distribution is actually referral of the pain from the deeper muscles to the skin. It is not a cutaneous distribution. If you look at these nerves, this is the common fibular or common peroneal nerve, which supplies the biceps femoris, the tibialis anterior, extensor, etc. This is the tibial branch, which supplies the biceps femoris on the other side, and that is the long head of biceps femoris, semimembranosus, tendinosus, and all the other muscles of the leg. Depending on which part of this sciatic is involved, you will get these distributions. The L5, the tibial nerve, and the common peroneal nerve. So the same in a pictorial representation. It could see your sciatica can come from here, or it can come from here because of the piriformis. It can also come because of entrapments in the thigh, though this is less. This is where there is a definite possibility of entrapment. Foot drop is usually a manifestation of problems here. I don't know whether you can see, I'm taking the red cursor across to this common peroneal nerve here, because the biceps tendon is a sharp tendon which is coming to the fibula like this, and this nerve goes very close to it and it can get entrapped. And this is one of the most common entrapments, and foot drop is very common. Even after neurosurgery for 10-12 hours, you can get foot drop. And unless people take care to flex the leg and support it, cushion it, etc., you can land up with foot drop. And people who live in ICU, who stay in ICUs for long periods, can also get this foot drop. And like Mary described, it must have been her patient must have had a entrapment. So MTRPs, muscle knots and taut bands, this is an area of inflammation that causes the pain. These diagrams are drawn by Mary Abraham. She's a very good artist, and I keep telling her my ideas and she draws them. And then of course I will sit and crib, and then she'll go and correct it some more. So we have a very nice situation of I keep demanding and she keeps sort of giving me all the results I want, and most of the time little more than what I want. So this is a normal muscle, this is a shortened muscle. Shortening of the muscle means it will be pulling on the tendinous insertion, causing inflammation here and causing pain here. So when you have hamstring muscle pain, it will be behind the fibula when biceps femoris is involved. It will be the medial and tibial area, like a knee pain when the semitendinosus is involved. When the end is very, very irritable, it will come like this. This is the reason for many of the pains, especially arthritis of the knee. Any arthritic pain will be because of this kind of a thing. This is also what happens in CRPS. I won't go into those details now, I'll get lost. And this spasm of a muscle with multiple MTRPs can give rise to a burning pain, because as I mentioned, there are a lot of nociceptors in muscles, and the muscle nociceptors, they have an abundance of temperature sensors. That's why you get the burning sensation. And this probably the outer thigh pain in facet problems is because of this phenomenon, because as we do needling, this pain goes off. But when we do the needling, vastus intermedius is extremely painful. So this is a patient. She's not a back pain patient. She's a cancer patient who, I think you are seeing her videos. She's dancing. She's a very happy, she was a very happy lady, and she was dancing all the time. And once when she did some very vigorous dancing, she landed up with severe pain in the leg. And then when I put the ultrasound on her, why is the video not playing? Something wrong? I'll remove the cursor. Okay, Command L. Oh, yeah, right. With the cursor, this goes. I can't play the videos. Can you see the shimmering in the muscle? When you see shimmers like this, that means the patient has a lot of pain. It's like visible pain. Down the ages, pain has been something where the patient says it hurts and you have to believe it. Whereas here now I have a tool which shows me visible pain. Needle is going in. See the shimmers increasing. See all this. The moment you put the probe, you can see this in many patients. Yeah. Vastus intermedius, that was. So this is the nerve entrapments which happen is intertransversus muscle and the psoas. This is what happened in Lata. And then there are patients who have piriformis syndrome. Piriformis here, the gemelli, internal obturator and inferior gemelli, the sciatic nerve caught in between them. This is the biceps muscle which coming from the obturator, ischial tuberosity to the fibula, and semitendinosus coming to the in the pes tendon. So this is the radicular pattern of pain. This I think I have already spoken about the allodynia and hyperalgesia is because of the dermal motor elements and the erector pili muscles. So this is what happens in herpes. Just above the ribs, you have burning pain in the skin. This is because of the intense spasm of the intercostal muscles and also the intense spasm of the dermal motor elements. Then of course the mungi, which our patients always grumble about. Put a few needles in these patients, these mungis are all disappearing. So how am I for time? Am I very late? Because I have a few videos which will take time. Ultrasound. Can we give the audio for this video? Here. Audio is on? Ultrasound the image. This is the spinalis here with the underlying multifidus. This is the longissimus. It's not coming. This is the iliocostalis. Now I have. Okay, forget it. I think. So this is intercostal, iliocostalis, longissimus, and my this one. You're taking this off and putting there. नहीं audio video का चाहिए. So here is, you can see the needle which is coming in here. Difficult to show. I can play the video because it's explaining a lot of things. Reiterate, these needles are in the iliocostalis to quadratus lumborum, longissimus to quadratus lumborum. These are all in the spinalis. Iliocostalis, and quadratus lumborum. These are all through iliocostalis and spinalis, longissimus. These three are going into the psoas through the quadratus lumborum in a longitudinal way. Look at the angle. They are hitting the side of the vertebral body. Okay, now I am going to do the same thing on the other side, where I am going through the. I have already gone into the quadratus. Another needle. through the longissimus to quadratus, and this is going into the, to visualize the psoas, depth increase karo udhar. This needle also, you can see the psoas as in between the transverse processes. So here, yeah. Now this needle, I can see that it is going through the iliocostalis, quadratus lumborum, and now it is going entering into the psoas. I'll be showing it to you on the ultrasound today because we couldn't. Again, another level at this level. You can see that though this is 100, it is at this angle. It's going almost parallel to the back, but with a slight, maybe something like a 45-degree or less than that angle. If I were to show this is the way it would be. Sometimes these needles can hit the nerve root foramen also. So towards the end, one has to be careful to go slowly and not traumatize the patient. So this is quadratus. In all these, if you see, I have left about 1 centimeter because her quadratus lumborum ends at about 6.6 centimeters, 7 centimeters plus. See, like yesterday, somebody was asking about the, do you hit the nerve root? You do sometimes. So you have to be cautious about going slow in the last 1 or 2 centimeters. And the other thing is, the needles which are going into the psoas are the ones which have the maximum chance of going into the intertransverses as well. Those 3 needles which I showed you at the end. So now here is another one video, going into the continuation of the same video. Just now it's going through longissimus and then going into the quadratus. It is hitting quadratus and you can see that the patient is getting pain. Quadratus lumborum. Incidentally, this patient was under GA, that's why we could do this video well. She had needle phobia, so we did her needling under GA. Iliocostalis and going into the quadratus lumborum. Yes. And at the lower end of quadratus lumborum, I can see. Atmaram, take hege video. So I'm doing over level. Same needles. Dexmet, spinalis, longissimus and quadratus lumborum. Ketamine nahi to nahi kari. Here, clips are na. Bas, this is. Prilok. And this is iliocostalis. Those with needle phobia will not know. And yes, and quadratus. Okay. The questions which were going on here was that this patient we had done under GA. So they were asking about what GA we were giving. It is usually Prilox for the skin and piroxicam orally before the procedure, or even paracetamol IV continuous 1 gram, and in addition dexmedetomidine, ketamine and propofol. So this is a video where paravertebral area needling is going on. Can you see the needle coming in there? It's coming into the quadratus lumborum here, that it's entering the quadratus. This is, you will be seeing all this, so I thought I better familiarize you with the appearance. So the same things. Let us look at buttock needling. Typical radicular pain. Typical radicular pain, she had a disc. No, I think it was one. I always do both the sides of the body because body is bilaterally symmetrical. The pain may be on one side of the body, but the pathology will be there on both. You have to understand that. In any condition, it is bilaterally symmetrical. Even if I were to do trigeminal neuralgia, I may do the other side once because the jaw moves together. It just doesn't happen on one side. Trigeminal neuralgia, I treat it as masticatory muscle spasms. Okay, it's the mandibular nerve only. Anyway, let's not go there. Now, this is gluteus maximus and piriformis. This is, you can see it, I hope you can see this clearly. superior gemellus, internal obturator, and inferior gemellus, and this is the gluteus maximus. So all these same thing in a magnification, and here is your sciatic. So here is a patient where you can see MTRPs. Can you see these dark, round things? This was an interesting patient. This is the, which buttock is this? This is the left side. You can see these small dot, and she had pain only on this side. If you see the other side, this is the right buttock. You don't see those little dots. So MTRPs can be visualized like this. So L4-5 radiculopathy I have said specifically. See, I am talking about mechanical back pain. When I say radiculopathy, I am talking about radiculopathy coming because of intertransversus and psoas spasm. L4-5 median branch is the dorsal root. It supplies the erector spinae as well as the small muscles of the back like rotatoris, intertransversus, etc. And then the L4-5 anterior root will supply the piriformis. So it becomes a double whammy. So L4-5 is always a problem. L4-5 is the commonest area for involvement of discogenic pain and facetogenic pain. And so it will give you a problem from the nerve root itself and also through the sciatic. So this is the same anatomical picture, another anatomical picture. This is the dissection picture. This is the 2006, I think. Yes, 2006 picture. This is the gluteus maximus which is reflected. Here is your piriformis, and here are your gemelli. Superior gemellus, internal obturator, and inferior gemellus, and the sciatic nerve which is lying on the quadratus femoris. In fact, till I did this dissection, I didn't even know that gemelli muscles existed. So in the dissection room, I asked Rakhi, what are these muscles here below? To me, this looks like a sciatic nerve is getting scissored between these two muscles. Which are these muscles? Then she explained to me that these are the gemelli. That is when I realized that piriformis syndrome is actually a combination of piriformis and gemelli muscles. From 2006 to 2016, I published this paper. Is it only piriformis kind of thing? So I published that paper. So I had the experience of about 10 years of needling to know that piriformis syndrome is not just piriformis. So this, I think I showed you this, told you this example yesterday. So I need not do that. So when you have fibrosis after surgery, this is what it looks like. This is the normal appearance of muscle, fascicular appearance. This is over the scar. You can see that fascicular appearance is gone. We are doing this study now to see the muscles in failed back surgery syndrome patients, because when we first see how thick these muscles are and how thick is the fibrosis, and after our 6 or 8 sessions of needling, we plan to show the islands of muscle which come in the fibrous tissue, also the increase in the thickness of these muscles because of the PRP-like effect of dry needling. When you do dry needling, it's a micro trauma. It releases a little blood in the system, in the muscle, and it acts as plasma-rich, platelet-rich plasma in these areas, and it is a healing, regenerative kind of a treatment. Because I wanted to know why in CRPS, islands of black muscle appear in the fibrotic tissue. So this is what I thought happens. So we are doing the same study in failed back surgery syndrome patients also. Thank you very much. I think I have strayed a little bit from mechanical back pain, but I believe it was necessary. By the way, this is when you look at the Mount Everest from the Everest base camp on the Tibetan side, you don't get to see this very often. I had been to Lhasa and to this EBC on the Tibet side, and this is the appearance of the Everest. Thank you very much.
Question from Ramya Mahajan sir. What is injected in trigger injections?
Ha, okay. Trigger injections, usually very small amount of, maybe about 5 milligram or 10 milligrams of Kenacort, the same particulate, this one, what do you call it, steroid. See, today there is a lot of arguments in the West that we should not use particulate steroid, and they use Celestone, which is betamethasone, in many of the places. The action of betamethasone is is less than a day. How they expect to produce lasting changes with this kind of an injection, I have no idea. I think somebody mentioned about Manchikanti's article where they said that local anesthetic works better than steroid is because they are using Celestone. And so I don't want to comment on their rationale and logic and all that. I still continues to use particulate steroid only, and I believe it works very well. And so for trigger injections also, I do 10 milligrams of steroid only. And when I'm doing many trigger injections in all the muscles involved, I may just use 1 milligram, 2 milligram here and there. I simply dilute the 10 milligrams into 10 ml, and I keep injecting 1 ml here, there, everywhere into all the muscles which I believe are very painful. And then, of course, this is meant to be a temporary action. This is being kind to the patient, that's all. After that, after it has been done, then we anyway follow it up with dry needling. And I can tell you that I have found again and again, trigger injections are extremely temporary, and unless you streamline the effect with further dry needling, they last very short time. But once dry needling comes in, automatically things become very much better for these patients.
Another question from Mahajan sir. What size needle for deep trigger injection? Say psoas muscle.
Into psoas muscle, you can use a spinal needle. 23 gauge spinal needle is good enough. Trigger injection into psoas, yes. Psoas spasm is very much a feature, especially in lumbar canal stenosis. You can do the psoas injection with fluoroscopy also. You simply go into the transforaminal area, slip slightly laterally out of the safe zone, you will hit the psoas.
Another question, can we see all muscles like obturator internus and 2 gemelli in same view as labeled in figure? I think he's referring to USG figure.
Yes, you can see the gemelli and the obturator internus. Usually it is at the same level as below the this one, sacrococcygeal ligament. Little below that, in case you want a guide to that.
How to localize trigger points in USG?
How to visualize trigger point in USG?
Seeing trigger points in USG is difficult with this quality of USG. Sometimes you see this when they are in an abundance like this, very severe pains, you see this. In another cancer patient, I remember when she developed a sudden metastasis, her pectoralis major was full of these black holes. But in general, it's not very easy to see, though 3D ultrasound has been used to demonstrate this one, myofascial trigger points. There is a publication by J. Shah et al. I think it is Sikdar and Shah or someone, where it's a 3D demonstration of myofascial trigger points. Please look it up. I think it's available on the net. Or if I can locate that article, I will put it in this thing for you guys.